He kōna ipurangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
What powers New Zealand? We proudly produce much of our electricity from renewable sources.
Where the river emerges from the Roxburgh Gorge, a start has been made on the biggest power scheme ever undertaken in New Zealand.
But we also rely heavily on fossil fuels for some energy needs. And recent gas shortages are creating turbulent times for several companies.
A Taranaki manufacturer revealed it could be forced to shut down production for up to 4 months.
What's going on now? And what does the future of New Zealand electricity have to do with an early 1900s household chore schedule in a small Canterbury town?
Housewives in Akaroa were only allowed to iron at certain times of the day.
Kia ora, nau mai, hara mai, ki te ao hurahanga. Hello and welcome to Our Changing World, ko Concannon tēnei. Today we're going to delve into New Zealand's energy landscape. What we use to power our homes, our transport networks and our businesses. From big industrial processes to switching on the kettle. And when I talk about energy, I mean all of this. Electricity is a part of this, an important part, but not the whole thing.
I was talking to my PhD student yesterday, telling him he needs to be more careful around his use of energy and electricity because people do swap them around.
This is Dr Jen Purdie, a senior research fellow at the Centre for Sustainability at the University of Otago. She previously worked in the energy sector and now she researches the interactions between climate and energy. So let's start with electricity. And for electricity, we do quite well at generation using renewable sources.
We're about 88% average of the last few years, and we have been quite renewable for quite a while. We mainly can be so highly renewable because of the large hydro schemes that have been around for the last 100 years. And so we're 56% reliant on hydro. We have about 6% wind, about 1% solar, about 18% geothermal.
The latest 2025 energy report just came out, and the figure for our electricity generated from renewable sources dropped to 85.5%. Wind, solar and geothermal were all up, but hydro generation was down because of the dry conditions across the winter of 2024. So the final 14.5% of electricity we needed last year was produced using coal and gas.
We burn it, mix that, throw some water in to create steam, and usually it's steam driving the turbines. And the important thing about coal and gas or any other non-renewable electricity is that you can keep the coal in a big pile and you can keep the gas in a tank and you can turn it on when you need it, whereas renewables arrive when they feel like it, and when they're not there, then you're in trouble and can't generate electricity, particularly wind and solar, which we have no way of storing at all, well, apart from batteries, but no way of storing the fuel, if you like, whereas the hydro schemes, if they've got storage lakes, we can close the gates and hold back the water until we need it. So what we do is if the wind's blowing, we'll use that first and close the gates and hold the hydro water, and when the wind stops and the sun goes down, then we'll open the gates and use the hydro water. And when there's a dry period, usually a dry winter is the most problematic because that's when the demand is highest, then we might not have enough water to generate, and so that's generally when we use coal and gas.
Coal and gas are the handy things in our back pocket that we currently use when the timing of peak demand doesn't sync up with when renewables are available.
Electricity demand is not flat across the year, so we have a lot higher demand in winter because of all the heaters and lower demand in summer. Unfortunately, 80% of our hydroelectricity inflows arrive in the South Island, in the big hydro lakes in the South Island, and they are all quite strongly snow-fed, so they tend to get not much water at all in the winter and lots of water in the summer, which means our fuel for generation is arriving when the demand is low. Also, throughout the day, we use very little electricity overnight, and between sort of 6 and 8 p.m. in the evening is when everyone comes home from work, turns on their heaters, turns on their tallies, cooks dinner, and that's when demand is the highest.
Jen and I have been talking electricity, so 85.5% renewably sourced. But when we talk about New Zealand's total energy consumption, including electricity, renewable sources represent 45.5% of that total, according to the latest figures. That's because we're still powering a lot of things using fossil fuels. which, when we burn them, release greenhouse gases that contribute to climate change and get counted in our emissions.
Transport is the big one. So in New Zealand's emissions profile, transport produces about 17% of our emissions, and electricity only produces about 5%. So our main tool in the toolbox for decarbonisation is to electrify our transport and our industrial heat, which is burning stuff, big burners, drying, that sort of stuff.
So these energy demands are oil for our cars, our ferries, our airplanes, and then coal, predominantly coal or gas as well for those kind of industrial processes?
Predominantly coal. So, for example, Fonterra uses coal to dry its milk powder, and they are slowly electrifying their coal burners. Because it's very high-level heat, which means it's very hot heat, it is harder to use electricity to supply that. It's easier to burn coal to do that. And same in steel making, they use a lot of coal, coking coal, because it burns at a very high heat.
Is there ongoing work to kind of shift those industrial processes towards electricity?
Yes. And the last government had quite a few policies in place and funds to help people electrify their industrial heat processes. So they had something called the Giddy Fund, which gave a lot of money to electrifying processes in industry, and several industries took advantage of that, and it certainly sped up electrification of industrial heat.
The poster child for this now disestablished Giddy Fund is NZ Steel.
Let's return to the announcement that a new electric arc furnace will be built at New Zealand Steel's Glenbrook Steel Mill. Now, this will cut 800,000 tonnes of emissions from day one. It's about the same as 300,000 cars. The cost of the project is $300 million, and the taxpayer is stumping up about half that, $140 million.
This electric arc furnace will replace approximately 50% of their coal-fired steelmaking. Originally tipped to be up and running in 2027, they're currently on track to start trialling it for steelmaking in March 2026. And it's now estimated that this switch will reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 1 million tonnes. And alongside electrification, there are some companies making a shift to getting heat energy from renewable sources. Things like geothermal, biogas, liquid biofuels and woody biomass. For example, a tissue company in Kaurau switched from natural gas to geothermal steam. They also got some fund from the Giddy scheme to help with this. The National Party disagreed with the Giddy scheme, saying that corporations didn't need taxpayers' help to reduce their emissions and should get on with the job themselves. Under the current government, the fund was scrapped in late 2023. So that's the industrial processes side of things. Transport is also going electric. A transition that should continue, says Jen, as availability and pricing of electric options improves over the next few years.
Electric cars are reaching price parity with petrol cars, so it's the same price to buy an electric car or a petrol car, and a lot cheaper for people in the long run if they can afford to buy one. The next cab off the rank is buses. They're pretty easy to electrify. Light trucks are going to be electrified. Heavy trucks are going to use things like hydrogen and biofuels to decarbonise, although that's harder.
Well, 2 new zero-emission trucks have been launched today as part of an effort to reduce emissions from transport. They are the first of 20 hydrogen fuel cell trucks that TR Group will lease out to companies under a government-backed program with Hiringa Energy.
This is from March this year, though New Zealand Post has had a hydrogen-powered truck on the road for 2 years now. But yeah, early days. And then we get down to the even trickier to decarbonise transport sectors.
Aviation and shipping are really hard, and International Aviation Association and Shipping Association have had aspirational targets to decarbonise with no policies behind them. But the International Maritime Organisation has just brought in some policies. Electric planes are coming. There's a 60-person passenger plane in Europe which is electric, so that's coming.
Here in Aotearoa, there's a fully electric passenger ferry that's been operating in Wellington Harbour since 2022, although it's currently out of action waiting on a replacement part. And one of the 2 electric ferries bought by Auckland Transport is currently undergoing on-water tests. Plus, Air New Zealand has purchased an electric plane which is lined up to fly a commercial Wellington to Marlborough route starting in 2026.
It's going to be pretty exciting. It's a new way to get mail across the Cook Strait in New Zealand. At the moment it has to go on ship. It takes 3 hours. This will take about 35 minutes.
Okay, so electrification is happening. Faster in some areas, slower in others. That means we'll be able to use renewably generated electricity to power some things that fossil fuels used to do. Of course, this also means we'll need to grow that electricity supply. More on that later. But right now, we still need coal, oil and gas. Where are they coming from? First, coal. We mine coal in New Zealand, and I'm simplifying here, but you can think of us as generally mining two kinds. There's a lower quality version that we can use here for heating and electricity generation, and because of unique processes in the Glenbrook steel mill for making steel here too. The amount of this lower quality coal we mine in New Zealand doesn't cover what we need, so we also import more, mostly from Indonesia and a bit from Australia. Then the second kind of coal we mine, from the west coast of the South Island, is higher quality. Good for high heat production for making iron and steel, and therefore higher value. We export that. Second, oil. We extract oil from several fields in the Taranaki region. This gets sent overseas to be refined since the Marsden Point refinery closed and sent back to us. Plus, we import more. And third, gas. We have a closed loop when it comes to gas. We use all of what we extract from the domestic gas fields. No import, no export. But recently, we've just not been producing enough.
Our gas production's dropped by 50% in the last decade. In February this year, it hit its lowest point since the 80s.
This is Kirsty Johnston, an investigative reporter in RNZ's in-depth team.
Forecasts say that the reserves should last maybe 6 years, but yeah, it's not looking good, and all of that kind of adds up to this picture where you've got demand is now higher than supply, so lots of businesses basically can't get the gas that they need.
And how did we get to here? I mean, did we presume that they were going to produce more and then just fail to, or was this signalled a while back, but we just didn't see the signs?
So most of our gas fields were developed decades ago, and we haven't found significant new reserves in 20 years, even though there's been a lot of money spent and a lot of looking. It's a well-known issue. It's not new. You can see that the gas fields have been in decline for a long time. To be fair, they have run out a little bit faster than people were anticipating. And I'll just explain kind of what that means. So you've got, your gas fields and you dig a well in, and you've got to fossick around kind of under the earth to find the gas. And what's happening is, somebody described it to me like when you're at the end of your drink with your straw, and you're trying to get the last bits out, and it gets harder and harder to get that last bit out. That's the point that they're at.
The result of this has been increased gas prices and companies failing to get the gas contracts they need, resulting in businesses slowing down manufacturing and closing.
It's really severe, and I honestly, until I'd started doing this reporting, I really didn't have my head around it. So we could ration gas. So Methanex, for example, which is the big methanol manufacturer in Taranaki, they use a massive proportion of our gas. So I think it's 40%. So people are saying, well, you could, shut them down and we could use that gas for everybody else, which in theory would work. But the kind of complicated part of that is that now this government's saying, no, we want to invite people here, we want to welcome people to drill for more gas, and Methanex plays this kind of crucial role in that it does what they call it underwrites the supply. So if you're like a big company wanting to come spend heaps of money drilling for gas, you want to make sure somebody's going to buy the gas, and that historically has been Methanex.
So let's get to that then. There's this reversal of the ban on offshore oil and gas exploration. Is that going to help?
No, it's not going to help, particularly in the short term. It might help in the long term. So whether it helps in the long term depends on whether they find gas and then whether that gas is economic to extract. But the kind of average time it takes to bring a new well online is like at least 10 years. I think the average is 16 years. So, and then, I said earlier, they think we've only got up to 6 years in our existing supplies. So you can see the maths there just doesn't add up.
The government looked into importing, but it seems like that's going to be far too expensive. On Checkpoint in early August, Resources Minister Shane Jones said he met with gas extraction companies and they told him they'll be able to accelerate the delivery of gas. But that he was also seeking advice on whether the government could step in to ensure that the electricity system used more coal to reduce its reliance on gas, so that the gas doesn't get bought up by the electricity generating companies to the detriment of other businesses. For those of us using gas at home, close to 300,000 households, we fit into a little 4% slice of this gas. I asked Kirsty if her reporting shows we should expect rapid price increases.
I don't think immediately that's kind of the top of the list of concerns. Prices will probably go up as competition for dwindling supply intensifies, particularly for if you're a prison and gas or a school or hospitals. They kind of have these longer term gas contracts, and those are the things that people are finding really hard to renew when they come up. So they're probably likely to be next impacted. The consumer's probably a bit further down the line. Although, if it were me and I had a gas connection, I'd probably be looking to get rid of that, I think.
Right, so that was our little gas shortage segue. Back to Dr Jen Purdie, who's quite clear that she doesn't think further offshore oil and gas exploration is a good idea.
It's a big picture. So I'll start globally. Globally, oil demand is projected by the International Energy Agency and most large oil companies to demand to peak either in the next few years or definitely in the next 10 years. So demand is about to start going down for oil. Globally, everybody wants to decarbonise. Most people want to decarbonise. So 70% of global emissions reductions are going to come from the energy sector. That is the big way that we are going to decarbonise. To do that, we need to build a whole load of electricity generation. Renewables are by far the cheapest now, so that will happen quite naturally. So we are electrifying and moving away from oil and gas and coal. Because of the projected decrease in demand of oil and gas in the coming decade, global investor confidence is lagging and it is getting harder to find investors. For this reason, starting to look for new oil and gas around New Zealand seems to me to be a bad idea. If you combine that with the fact that we've got a climate crisis, then all fossil fuels should stay in the ground from now on.
Jen uses modelling to understand how we could supply New Zealand's future electricity needs. With the electrification that's happening and likely to continue to happen, New Zealand is projected to more than double its electricity demand in the next 25 years. Renewables are now the cheapest form of electricity generation. So that's where we're going.
But the problem with renewables is that when the wind stops blowing or the sun stops shining or we have a dry year, then we need something to fill the gap. So New Zealand, to get through to 2050, we have a storage problem. So on a dry winter, on a cold night, we need something else to burn or to generate electricity with. So that's the problem, and the answer could be gas and coal. It could be to look for more, except this timing issue that I've just talked about. So the question is, what's the solution for firming up renewable electricity? And the answer is not a very satisfying one. The answer is what they call the portfolio solution. Now, that means that we need to do a little bit of overbuild, so we build a few more wind farms than we think we need, just so something's turning at some point. We could build a pumped hydro storage scheme.
Pumped hydro storage is where you essentially build a lake that acts like a battery. So it stores water all year round that you can use to generate electricity when you need it. The RNZ battery project of the previous government was investigating the feasibility of this at Lake Onslow in Otago.
And they got a long way through deciding whether it be worthwhile or not when National got in and scrapped the scheme. So we didn't actually get to the end of that investigation to know whether it was a good idea or not. The price had gone up from an estimated $4 billion to an estimated $16 billion, which was a very expensive thing. But it was a big hammer that would have hit one nail and sort of solved all the electricity system problems. It was large and it was expensive. Alternatively, we can do a whole lot of little things, and all those little things are some grid-scale batteries, some vehicle-to-grid batteries, some overbuild, like I've said, build some more geothermal, although there's not many sites left, explore deep geothermal, and probably most importantly, demand response.
In July, the government released a draft plan to double the geothermal energy production within 15 years. It includes investigating supercritical geothermal, which is about harnessing the hot fluid more than 5 kilometres below the surface. Here's Resources Minister Shane Jones talking about exploring this deep geothermal.
It is a bit of a moonbeam shot, however, such as the critical importance of energy. I think that the community should expect the government is willing to put capital at risk.
Geothermal energy is already being used by a number of businesses for heating and heat processing. And increasing the capacity for geothermal to produce electricity would be handy because it doesn't rely on rainfall levels or sunshine or blowing winds. So it could fit nicely into that portfolio solution. But what does demand response mean? And why does Jen think it's going to be an important part of how we supply everyone with electricity in the future?
Well, everything we've talked about is on the supply side. Can we generate enough to meet demand at every location? The alternative is to turn things off.
She's got a good story to illustrate it.
In Akaroa, near Christchurch, it was a small village, it was isolated, and they had one of the first hydro plants in the country. And when they got the plant, they said to the whole village, yay, we've all got electricity now, and we haven't had electricity before. And so everybody got lighting in their houses and got plugs. And suddenly they ran out of electricity after about 2 years because everybody went out and bought toasters and electric washing machines and electric lights. And so suddenly their plant wasn't big enough anymore. And so they brought in a scheme where housewives were given a time of the day when they could do their ironing. And so in 1914, housewives in Akaroa were only allowed to iron at certain times of the day, and they staggered when they could all do it so that they didn't overload the power plant. So that was demand response.
These days, our systems can deal with a bit more than concurrent ironing. But we still have that capacity issue of needing to cope with your 6 p.m. post-work shower and dinner and heating in the wintertime.
If we want to supply that with generation, we have to have a whole load of plant that sits around idle most of the time so it can just supply that little tiny evening peak in winter. So instead, the other way of looking at it is to turn things off. And people don't like the idea of turning things off, but sometimes and often it doesn't have to be anything that anyone's going to notice. So at the moment, Transpower, the grid operator, has an arrangement with people who own large cool stores that if they get grid congestion, they can turn off a cool store for half an hour. And the cool stores are so well insulated that they don't even mind. They just save a bit of electricity and they're paid for that service. So the same thing can be done with people's hot water heaters. If hot water heaters are well insulated, they can turn off for half an hour or an hour between 6 and 7 at night when the demand is high and save quite a lot of electricity if everyone does it, and people won't even notice. But in an ideal world, they'll be paid for that service. So that's the idea, and that is starting to take off. And so Tiwai Point, when they got a new contract for electricity last year, beginning of last year I think it was, agreed to provide demand response. They said, we can't turn the whole factory off, but we could turn off this part of it and this part of it, and we could turn it off for this many hours. And then last winter in 2024, when the lake suddenly went dry and the contract with Tiwai Point was quite new, they were immediately called on and asked to provide demand response. So they shut down a large part of their factory for quite a long time, weeks I think, because we were low on water. It's in its infancy and it's sort of on a case-by-case basis, but I think in the next 20 years we will get to the point where if you sign up for electricity, you will untick the box if you don't want to provide demand response, and if you do, your hot water heater might be turned off for half an hour between 6 and 7 and you won't even notice it and you'll be paid for that service. And that can make quite a significant dent on that peak and mean that we don't have to overbuild and have all this plant that's sitting around all the time.
Something that Jen has also looked at in her modelling is how climate change will affect our electricity supply and demand in the future.
The supply side is that it's going to get wetter on the west coast and drier on the east coast. It's going to get windier in the south and less windy in the north. So I've factored that into the electricity system modelling and into all the other, or most of the other New Zealand electricity system models are now using those adjustments because they use historical wind and water to estimate how much wind and water we're going to have in the future. So I've now adjusted those. But on the other side of that is the demand side. So we're expecting population growth, so demand's going to go up because of that. We're expecting GDP growth. But mainly we're expecting a doubling of electricity demand by 2050 because of electrification of transport and industry. So those are the things that are being modelled out into the future.
But I mean, more rain on the west coast, is that good news for our hydroelectro schemes?
Yes, and there's not many stories in climate change that are good news. So yes, it is. But the biggest thing, I mean, there's a small increase by mid-century in overall hydro inflows. There's going to be less snow stored, which is not so good if you're a skier. But it's good in that normally the water is captured up in the mountains in the winter and it stays there just when we need it. And then it melts and comes flowing down into the lakes in summer when we don't need it. So we need to use the full range of our storage, and we spill that water as well because it arrives in summer often when the lakes are full and we can't hold on to it. We can't generate with it because nobody wants the power. So we throw it down the river. So there'll be less spill in the future. But floods are going to get bigger, so it's going to get harder to capture those behind the storage lakes. So there's lots of different factors to it.
For Dr Jen Purdie, our energy needs can't be separated from the climate crisis. And so for her, decarbonisation must be prioritised. And as we shift away from fossil fuels towards electrification, there are many ways to make the model work, she says, to supply our growing energy needs. We just need a good plan to navigate the transition. Thanks to Dr Jen Purdie of the University of Otago and Kirsty Johnston of RNZ's In-Depth team. This episode was produced by me, Claire Concannon, production help was from Ellen Rikers, and sound engineering was by William Saunders. If you have any feedback or questions, you can email us, ourchangingworld@rnz.co.nz. And if you want to hear about another future energy moonshot, well, we recently spoke to New Zealand's one and only nuclear fusion company about their mission to make fusion energy a reality. I'll link to that episode in the show notes. Tēnā koe I whakarongo mai. Thanks so much for listening. I'm Claire Concannon. Have a great week. Kia pai, te wiki.